Good evening, everybody. I think people will join us progressively over the next few minutes, but we already have a good crowd of people here, so we will kick off. Good evening, and thank you for spending time with us tonight, or good afternoon if you're joining us from the West Coast. I'd just like to start by acknowledging that I am dialed in from the lands of the Ngunnawal people here in Canberra, and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands on which people are joining us from all over Australia tonight. Welcome and thank you. My name is Megan Graham. I'm from the National Office for Child Safety. And I'm also a mum of two 6-year-old girls, and they love their sport. They're learning to swim and they're really keen gymnasts. And I love how much they're getting into sport, watching the Matildas, watching the Olympics, and they get so much out of being able to participate in their local sport and sports at school. But we know that children and young people haven't always been safe in sports. And it's a really tricky thing, I think, for us to think about and talk about as people who care about the children and young people in our lives. Making time out of your day, particularly if you're on the East Coast and you're maybe finishing up dinner, possibly putting kids to bed. It's really great to have parents, carers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, teachers, coaches, and anybody else that really cares about children and young people join us for this conversation, because while it's something we often don't want to think about and we just want to maybe hope that our children will be safe when they're joining in with sport, talking about it and thinking about it is really the first step in making sure that we make that a reality. A little bit before we go on to our wonderful speaker, Phil Doorgachurn, about our work at the National Office for Child Safety. We were set up after the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse. So we've been going about 6 years now, and we work in the Federal Attorney General's Department. Most of our work is delivering the national strategy to prevent and respond to child sexual abuse, and a big focus of that work is to raise awareness and help prevent child sexual abuse and other forms of harm coming to our children and young people. So one of our big focuses over the last year has been the One Talk at a Time campaign. These were ads that were in cinema, on TV, on the radio and social media. So I hope some of you were able to see those. And what we're really trying to do is get people who have children and young people in their lives to start thinking and talking more about this issue, because that's how we're going to prevent it. So without further ado, I will pass over to Phil from the Australian Childhood Foundation, who will lead us through tonight's webinar. Thank you so much, Phil.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Megan, and welcome everybody. And thank you again, like Megan said, for taking the time this evening. My name's Phil Doorgachurn. I use he, him pronouns, and I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation on the lands on which I'm presenting from today, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be in the room on the webinar with us today. I'm the General Manager of the Australian Childhood Foundation, and I lead the Strategic Safeguarding Children initiatives. And the Australian Childhood Foundation has been around nearly 40 years now, and our goal is really to end the trauma of abuse, exploitation and neglect of children and young people. We do that by providing therapeutic services to children who have experienced abuse, but we also work with organisations to prevent abuse from occurring in the first place. We've got a long history in sport, and we've worked with the likes of the Australian Sports Commission, the AFL, the NRL, Cricket Australia, Surf Lifing Australia, and many more sporting organisations. So it's hopefully useful that we're here to help and support you through this journey. A little bit about me. I have a long history in sport and child safeguarding. I was a former British international sprinter, and I was lucky enough to travel the world and compete in countries like the USA, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, and all across Europe. Sadly, probably now I'm not very fast anymore, and probably can't run for a bus without pulling a hamstring. So that's a little bit about my history in sport. But Following my athletics career, I then went into a number of safeguarding in sport roles. I was the former head of safeguarding for British tennis at the Wimbledon Championships, head of safeguarding for Arsenal Football Club for any, see some laughing emojis. I do like that. Yep, please be interactive. I love to see it. I was the former head of safeguarding for Arsenal Football Club, so any soccer supporters, let me know as well. And I also led the safeguarding training for the London 2012 Olympics, and most recently was the CEO of YMCA Safeguarding. So now I work with the foundation and I'm their general manager, supporting Australian businesses to make sure that they become child safe. So we are going to talk about child safety in sport, which does include child sexual abuse, but also other forms of abuse. Therefore, it really is important that you look after yourself. So if you or someone you know has been impacted by child abuse, there are services and resources available to help you. I want to acknowledge that there are many survivors of abuse in sport, and pay my respects to those and the ability they have to show up each and every day in this space. If you require any support, you'll see that we have Brave Hearts and the Blue Knot Foundation's numbers on here, so that you can contact. You can also go to childsafety.org.au/get support, and that will pop up in your chat box now. There's a really good list of resources for you to support you in your journey and in your space if anything should trigger you from this webinar. So why are we here? Well, we're going to be talking about the following things, which is what is child safety in sport, the importance of child safety in sport, how you can have, as Megan said, those conversations within sports clubs around how they keep your child safe or the child you care about safe, but also how can you have conversations with your children or young people that you care about in your life around staying safe. And it's kind of the pertinent time because the Olympics has just been on, and so I'd love to know how many of you have watched the Olympics and what your favourite sport was during the Olympics. I know I've been up to the early hours watching, and even more pertinent that the Paralympics begins next week as well. So I'm sure there'll be lots of bagged eyes underneath and lots of heavy bags under your eyes from watching this. So it really is a great time to talk about this right now. So again, in the chat box, if you've got the available to do it, feel free to type in any of the sports you've been watching. So firstly, let's define what do we mean by child safety in sport. So what's really helpful, I find, is defining it using the 3 Ps. So the first P being that we protect children and young people from abuse. So it's really important that child safety means we protect children and young people from being abused. And that can be sexual abuse, it can be physical abuse, neglect, emotional abuse, and family violence, prevention of family violence as well. The second P is about preventing harm. So that in sport can look as simple as like allowing children to have adequate water breaks when it's really hot so they don't become harmed. It also can include ensuring that we recruit the right people, the right coaches, officials, administrators within sport, and making sure they have appropriate checks so that we prevent any form of harm happening to children and young people. And then the final P is really about promoting their well-being. We know that sport has many benefits, and sport can contribute to children's and young people's well-being. And that well-being term can sometimes seem a bit broad. So there are some great definitions which include making sure that children feel valued, loved, and safe, that they have their material basics, they're healthy, they learn, they get to participate, and they have a positive sense of identity and culture. And we know sport can contribute to all of those things. So something as simple as allowing the group of children or young people to have a say on what the next kit looks like, or the kit colours, for example, really is a part of allowing them to participate, and it helps promote some of their well-being. So to recap, it's about protecting children and young people from abuse and harm, preventing harm, and promoting their well-being. Why does child safety in sport really matter? Well, every parent or carer, coach, sports administrator, and official will want children to reach their full potential in life. And this is absolutely true in sport. We know that for children to achieve their full potential, they need to feel safe and secure. You can see this on the diagram which we've created here. So this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and this explains what people need to reach their full potential. So we've adapted this and we've made it relevant to sport. But if I reflect on myself and when I was competing at the highest level that I did, if I talk you through some of these, when I was thinking about my best and when I ran my personal bests, which are the fastest time you can run over 100 and 200 meters, and when I enjoyed sport the most, I had the appropriate food, water, I had love from friends and family, and I was well rested. So I was actually keeping myself in good physical and emotional condition, which you'll see at the bottom of this triangle here. The next rung up is that you need to make sure you feel safe and secure. So I was free from abuse and harm at my club, and my coaches actively prevented harm by encouraging me to do things like not train for injuries and ensure things like I wasn't bullied online. So making sure that I felt safe enabled me to work towards my full potential. And really fundamentally, because I felt safe and I was safe, this enabled me to have a sense of belonging. I felt like I belonged to a squad. We all had each other's back and we was able to achieve and we worked together towards a common goal. This belonging also helped continue to enhance my motivation. I wanted to run my personal best and it enabled my confidence to soar, which is incredible. And you need that in sports to continue to improve. You need your confidence to really keep soaring. So as part of that, that helped me to reach my full potential and ensure that I helped to run for my country, which was one of my proudest moments. So we know for children, when they join sport, and I can talk to lots of children, so I think about my niece and nephew, the reason they join dance, the reason they play tennis, the reason they go to soccer, I should say, rather than football, is because they enjoy it. But when children and young people don't feel safe or it's not fun, lots of children, as we know, begin to drop out. Therefore, it's really important that we make sports safer and we make sure it's fun, because we know if it's safe and fun, children are going to be able to work their way up this ladder and make sure they achieve their full potential. And like I said earlier, sport supports positive child development. It helps us develop so many social skills, problem-solving skills. It helps us to deal with loss because we win and lose. It provides incredible health benefits and lots of psychological well-being benefits as well. But fundamental to having fun and enjoying and reaching your full potential, a key component is we need children and young people to feel safe. So you're probably asking, well, how do we do that, Phil? How can we make sure sport is safe? Well, there are a number of things which actually help us feel safe in sport and create safe sports clubs. So as a parent or carer or a sports administrator or a coach, there are these 10 national child safe principles. These principles outline what makes a sport safe, as well as organisations who don't work in sport. These principles apply to it too. So like Megan talked about 6 years ago when the National Office for Child Safety was created, one of the recommendations from the Royal Commission into institutionalised responses to child sexual abuse was that all organisations need a framework to embed to ensure that children are kept safe. This framework was the national principles. And as you can see in this beautiful diagram here, which I'll talk to you about, it provides a framework to making sure that all organisations, including sport, embed these because these are the known factors which help create a safe sports club. So if we start at the top round here, you can see that in principle 1, it's about having the best leadership, governance, and creating a child-safe culture. And that we know, and I know, and as you all know, culture is set at the top. So having really good boards of directors, making sure if we've got club committees or councillors, how they look like, the board and the leadership level of sports club really set the tone, saying, actually, we believe in child safety and we're going to invest and take time to take this seriously. As we work our way around the wheel, we'll come to number 2. So number 2, child safe principle number 2 is that children's rights are promoted and children are involved in decision making. That can be as simple as setting up a youth panel or a committee at your club. When I was at British Tennis, we had a youth panel which actually advised us on all of our policies, including stuff like selection policies. So that was a good way of getting children and young people's voice. As we continue to move around, principle 3, we ensure that families are involved. Making sure that families can be involved is really essential. You can do that through things like having a family committee, or you can release surveys or allowing feedback loops to engage families and have their say in the club. Standard 4 or principle 4 is really around equity and diversity. So you might want to create something like or host a Pride Cup so that you can have LGBTIQA plus children and young people feel included. Or you may have inclusion events for multicultural, multi-faith and multilingual backgrounds. Principle 5 is having really good, robust screening. So we know that sports are safe when we get the right people in sport. We make sure our volunteers, we make sure our staff are vetted appropriately. They have working with children checks, they have reference checks, just to say as a number of cases, but they're also interviewed. So having these processes help to create and make sport safer. On principle 6, it's about making sure we have complaints processes. So every club should have a complaints process. They should have child-friendly ones, because I think about my nieces and nephews who are quite young. They need to be able to understand how do they make a complaint and what even is a complaint. So making sure we have that, and you might want to have little posters around. And again, when I was at the YMCA in our services, we made sure we had posters which were at the eye level. So if it was a mini gymnastics or mini tennis. We know some of these kids are 4 and 5. The posters were actually at sort of our knee level, which is more at the eye level of those children. The last few principles, number 7, is around education and training. Sports come safe when people who work in sport have the right training and skills. And so that's that principle. And as we move into number 8, that is of creating safe physical and online environments. So ensuring that the physical fields, courts, pools are safe, but also that clubs online, so your online environment, including your social media channels, are safe. So you might have a social media policy which stops staff from talking to children through their own personal accounts. That could be a way of demonstrating that principle. Under principle 9 is continuous improvement. So we make sure that we continually improve. We know that lots of national sporting organisations have signed up to Sport Integrity Australia, which is the big overarching integrity body in Australia, to their improvement program to make sure that they continually improve in sport. And then finally, number 10 is making sure you've got the right policies and procedures, which put children front and centre so they're not harmed and they're not abused and that their well-being is promoted, going back to our definition. So that's a kind of a really quick whistle-stop way of saying how do we make sport safe. Now is there, as Megan talked about, the One Talk at a Time campaign. I'm going to show you the 60-second advertisement. You may have seen it at the cinema. I know I did when I was going to watch a Marvel film. And some of you may have seen it on TV or radio, but we're going to play the video. But this is, as a parent, carer, or anyone who works in sport, it really is important that we can have a conversation around this. And as some of you have said, your biggest fear is having those conversations is a bit scary. Well, this video helps us to start to have those conversations. And from that, we'll begin to explore some questions you can ask your sports club, but also some questions you can have with your kids. So I'll play it now. If for some reason you have, or my internet isn't great or yours isn't, we'll make sure we put a link within the chat box right now. So we'll put a link in terms of the Q&A, or we'll send a link to you so you can watch the video. So
I really want to go. Okay, I'll think about it. You know, it's never okay for someone to say or do things that make you feel uncomfortable, no matter what. Yeah?
How do I move this?
Try that one. Hey,
Yeah.
you know nobody should ever ask you to send pictures of yourself? Okay.
See? Cool. And then they said,
No thanks.
That's right. Because no one should touch you in a way that you're not okay with, even our family or friends. If you're not sure, you can always talk to me.
Conversations with our kids have the power to prevent child sexual abuse. Every talk brings us closer to a world without it. Let's end child sexual abuse, one talk at a time. Authorised by the Australian Government, Canberra.
beautiful. It's an incredible video. And I worked with the National Office and a number of survivors who helped input towards this, and it's been a really powerful campaign, and it's why we're hosting this webinar. So you've got to see it. It's a great resource, and there's lots of resources that I'm going to take you through now, which is going to help you or support you within having these conversations. So though, as the video said, it's really important that we have a chat about child safety. Now, we know these conversations can be tricky, and from your responses about what worries you, some of you, a good percentage of you, are really worried about having, or a bit scary to have these conversations, and I absolutely understand that. When I was a child, we didn't talk about this, and I think a number of you can probably resonate with that. But now I make sure I have these conversations with my niece and nephews, and I make sure I have these conversations with their sports clubs and my sisters and my family as well. It's never too late to actually have these conversations. It doesn't matter if your child's been at this club for 10 years or your child is just starting out in sport. I think what's the really essential part here is just about having the conversation. And we know conversations are really, really helpful in this space. So if we reflect back on the poll from earlier, and a number of you saying that you did feel confident, or it was kind of a good even spread around little confidence to some very confident to not to somewhat confident about having conversations with sports clubs. So we're just going to go through a few questions and a few tips and tricks, I suppose, to help you. Firstly, I suppose what's really important in this space, when you want to chat to your sports club, and I'm sure there's lots of sports people as we know, again, because we saw coaches, administrators who are on the call, the webinar, sorry. I think about the time when you actually have that conversation with the club. So it's probably not the best when the match is just about to start or the coaching session is just about to start, because there won't be a specific time for it. But you can always, what's really helpful and what I've done before is email ahead or call your club and ask them, can they set some time up to have a chat, or send them an email and have a chat about child safety with them. And this isn't about trying to catch people out. What this is really important is actually just trying to say, this is what's important to me and obviously to the club as well. We know lots of clubs take this really, really seriously. And it's actually great that clubs get to shout about this as well, because we know that there's a number of them doing some incredible stuff in this space. So although those conversations might feel tricky, again, like the video said, you can always start by having that one talk at a time, or that one question. So you can ask your club some simple questions like we've got on the screen here. How will your sports club keep my child safe? It's a really simple one. You can also stuff like, does the club have transparent child safe recruitment practices for staff and volunteers? Do they do working with children checks? Is there interviews for the staff? Another one, are your policies and procedures updated regularly? Who reviews them? Do we get to have a say in it as parents and carers? Do the kids get to have some say in it as well? Some other great questions, including, does the club have a designated child safety or integrity officer? And if they do, are their details promoted by the club? So it's really essential. And the way you can do that is simple. There's some great posters I've seen as I've walked around some sports clubs of some wonderful pictures of the incredible integrity officers or child safety officers there, and how to contact them and their contact details. Does the club have clear reporting processes for child safety concerns? So if I'm worried about a child safety in the club, is there a clear process? Again, is there a QR code? I've seen some great QR codes in clubs and some great child safe posters saying, if you're worried or concerned, share it. When I was at the Y, we did a lot of research with children and young people, and they came back and told us, if you see something, if you hear something, or if you feel something which makes you feel unsafe, tell someone. And that was our posters. We had see, hear, feel, tell someone. And then finally, you might want to ask questions like, are children, young people and families involved in any decision-making and child safe practices? So these are just a sample. There's a very small number of questions, but to make sure you're not sitting here scribbling them all down, worrying, Phil, how am I going to get these and remember these? Don't worry. We've got a slide here and we'll make sure we put in a chat box. There's a number of great organizations providing resources in this space. So a couple of these questions came from the Child Safety, from the National Office of Child Safety, which is the childsafety.gov.au/conversations. Sport Integrity Australia, like I talked to you earlier, a great body which oversees all integrity matters in sport in Australia. They have some of these questions derived from them as well. So if you go to sportintegrity.gov.au/resources, the Australian Childhood Foundation, so if you look at the childhood website, we have lots of great resources to support you as parents and carers and sports organisations to have these conversations. And finally, Play by the Rules as well is an incredible resource and has been resourcing Australia in this space for a number of years. So you can go on their website and they've got videos and resources again to help you with conversations and child safety in this space. So don't feel alone. Don't be worried about this. There's some great resources and there's some pre-made questions for you to help you. And if you're a sports club, there's questions there and there's support to help you answer those questions, but also to support you in implementing those child safe practices. They should also all be in your chat box right now. They've all been sent to you. So let's move to the final section, which is really around having conversations with children and young people. So we know that lots of you, again, at the start of this webinar, said that you do feel a little bit scary about having some of those conversations. Some are really confident, but it is, again, like we talked to, having that one talk at a time with your child is really essential. Again, if I reflect back, and as myself as a child, I don't remember ever having a conversation about child safety in sport. I think I was talked about stranger danger. I was told not to take performance enhancing drugs, but no one really talked to me about child safety. So I had a lot more about not taking performance enhancing drugs than I ever talked about my own safety and well-being. So I'm really glad that we're at this stage now where people in sport and kids in sport are being taught this really valuable lesson. So I get it scary. I've been there, sat down with my niece, who's quite young, and my nephew, and been like, oh, how do I do this? And here's some great tips again, which are available on those resourceful websites, which we'll share again shortly. But Some examples of what you can do and what's helped me, I suppose, before, and what's helped other parents, which we've spoke to, is it's really helpful by starting to talk about good and trusting relationships. Don't just dive in there sometimes around what's good and what's bad. It's really helpful to get children to have, I suppose, a balancing scale to understand what does good look like, and then what does maybe unsafety or uncomfortable feel like. So when they can describe to you what a safe and trusting and loving relationship is, you can then start to ask them questions really around, well, what makes is uncomfortable, or where do you feel uncomfortable or unsafe? Because they can then compare that against what feels like a safe and trusting relationship. What's also helped, I know, which has helped me before, is you can use prompts such as news reports, including as we've just had the Olympics, and I know lots of kids have been watching the Olympics. We also know that lots of children and young people are on a range of social media, and they'll be getting video clips or watching reels, for example, around what's happened in the Olympics. So again, a lot of you may have heard about the Dutch pole vaulter who was previously convicted for child sexual abuse, and he was booed quite aggressively on the court. So that was coming up, I know, on TikTok and other social media platforms and Instagram. So kids would have come across this. So that could be your starter for 10. You could say, hey, have you seen this? Let's have a little chat about what child safety means in sport and how you can feel safe. So you can always use those prompts. The other sort of top tip, I suppose, to give you is use everyday opportunities. It doesn't have to be the formal sit down. Sometimes we know as well for us as adults, but also as children, sitting eye to eye is sometimes a bit scary. So we all drive our kids, and well done to the many thousands and thousands of parents who drive their kids and spend hours. And I know when I worked at Arsenal, how many hours parents gave up for their child, driving them to and from practice and to and from games. And sometimes, not all the time, but during that time when you're driving them to practice, you can always just have a chat during those sort of 10 minutes or half an hour, whatever long it takes you, about child safety, or sometimes over dinner. So think of those just really easy ways to bring it into your conversations. So to help you, here's a few questions you might want to ask your child. Again, don't worry about frantically writing them down. We're going to share some resources where you can find them, but you can ask them, what makes you feel safe at your sports club? So I asked that to my niece, and she was like, some really, as they always give the best answers, the walls around me make me feel safe. The people who are there, my coaches are really lovely, and mummy and daddy get to watch me. That makes me feel safe. So really helpful understanding what her concept of safety is in the sport. You can also ask questions, stuff like, what would you do if an adult or another player at the club made you feel worried or scared? And that was a really key one when I spoke to my nieces and nephews around what they do. And it's actually tell someone, well, how'd you tell? And then you can start to elaborate a little bit more of how'd you tell and who would you tell? And would there be a situation where you might not want to tell, but actually it's always okay to tell? And I think what I learned from that space was the language tell. Usually when we talk about telling, children get told off. Telling is not a good thing. It's seen as sort of tattling on your friends, or so try and reframe that language to actually telling is a good thing, and it should be rewarded for telling. Finally, you might want to ask questions about if you started to receive unsafe messages or receive messages online that made you feel uncomfortable, such as people asking for naked images of you. How would you respond to that? What would you do? So these are just some real small questions. And again, you don't need to always have the answers. What's really important is that you have the conversation with kids, and you don't need to always know, because there's been times I don't know and I say, look, do you know what? That's a great question. Or that's a great answer. I don't know. Let me have a think and let me come back to you. So you don't always have to have those answers. But what will really help you again is there's a range of organisations here, again, also played by the rules as well, but Sport Integrity, the National Office for Child Safety, and the Australian Childhood Foundations, Bringing Up Great Kids, have got some really, really good resources which can help you and have some answers to those questions. So that's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour through some of the webinar, and I really want to get to some of the exciting bit as even more so. And we're going to go into a bit of a Q&A now, so a bit of the questions and answers. And we've had lots and lots of you start to populate questions in the chat, in the Q&A function. So feel free to continue to answer questions. And I'm going to hand over to Megan, who's hopefully the question master, because I can't see them, and to help me out.
Thank you so much, Phil. I think those were some really practical and helpful tips for us who are feeling a little bit unsure about how to approach this with a club, or who might volunteer with a club about how to go about it. So some really helpful resources shared there. One of the questions that I think will be really practical for everybody is a question about whether you know of any posters or existing resources that could be put up in clubs that people could find.
Yeah, great question. So again, there are sample resources. So Sport Integrity Australia have got some great sample posters which you can use. I know a lot of the national sporting organisations like Tennis Australia and others, Gymnastics Australia, Swimming, have created some downloadable templates as well, which you can use. Also on the child safety website as well, there are a series of ways to do that. You can also look at the YMCA. So formerly if you go to YMCA's website, there are some great posters again, which you can create on Canva yourself, or you can download yourself and use as those resources. One thing I'd probably recommend, rather than just print and create, just use somebody else's, is try and think around, have a chat with the kids in your club, because actually sometimes they might create a poster, and that's actually been the most impactful. Is it might help you get children, young people to create their own poster about what they should do if they feel unsafe and who they should tell. And if they create a poster, again, children are more likely to look at it. So that would be my bigger recommendation. But there are lots of sample templates you can use out there already.
Thank you, Phil. And I think we've just popped into the chat, for example, Speak Up and Make a Complaint, which is a resource developed by the National Office for Child Safety with the WA Children's Commissioner. And somebody else has asked in the chat about CALLED resources, or resources for culturally and linguistically diverse communities. I think the link we've given there is to the English version, but that one is translated into a number of other resources. So you should be able to find that on the website. And if you can't, feel free to email us at National Office for Child Safety at ag.gov.au, which is there on the screen, and we can help point you to some of these resources. I think we also had some questions about when children aren't directly telling you something is wrong, where they're more expressing some reluctance or feeling a bit funny, and sort of how you make sure that everybody takes that seriously and doesn't sort of brush children off because they're not able to fully articulate some of the concerns they might be having, or they don't even know why they feel funny, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a great question. So thank you for whoever supplied that. It's a really great question. Look, children tell us in different ways, and sometimes it can be just they don't like the change room. It might be that the lighting, or it might be something a little bit more uncomfortable or worse going on in their life. So the best way, like we are with all children, young people, is giving them the time and the space, knowing that you're there to listen. And I've always said, hey, I'm always here to listen to you. You can always tell me anything which you want to, and you provide that support. And actually, it's not about them always having to disclose, if it is even is a disclosure to you all the time straight away. It's knowing that they've got a safe environment where they feel trusted, valued, heard and listened to, and that you're always there and saying, I'm always here. You can always have a chat with me about anything which worries you or concerns you. And I remember a story where actually, it was really fascinating that we used to say this, and actually a number of the kids then came up and said, look, I'm really scared about coming to practice. And we were trying to work out why. And again, as adults, we put assumptions on that, Megan. And what we actually found out was we asked the kids and we said, so what is it? And we kept finding different ways. And some of them were too scared to talk, and others. So we did a bit of a survey. We asked others around talking to us. But we found out it was really as simple as that. It's really scary because the lighting towards the hall in which the community hall in which we played was broken basically down the corridor, and so therefore that long corridor was really dark, and it was simple as if you made it some light, that it just feels scary. So all we did was put some new lighting in and paid for some new lighting, and suddenly kids again said, it's not as scary as to walk down there now anymore. So again, listening to children and young people really is essential, because we find the answers, and allowing that space for them to have those conversations with us.
Thanks, Phil. I'm very conscious that we are pretty much right on time, but I'll ask one final question, which is a bit of a conglomeration of a couple of people's questions, which are, what if sports clubs don't have the right procedures in place? Where can you send them if they're really at the start of this safeguarding journey? And a part two is, how do you keep checking back in with them to make sure they're still following the policies and procedures and haven't sort of put it in a drawer and forgotten about it?
Yeah, great questions again. So thank you everybody for those. Look, safeguarding and child safety is a journey. I will always say that it's never finished. So if you haven't started, again, there are a plethora of resources depending on which state and territory you're in, but also lots of national sporting organisations. And I've seen that someone in the chat box has said Hockey Australia has some great resources as well. So look on your national sporting organisations resources. There's also, again, child safety. So Megan's team have incredible set of resources which talk about practical implementation of the National Child Safe Principles, which I talked to you about earlier. There's also a culturally safe version as well, so how to do that for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander to make sure we're inclusive within our sporting clubs. There's lots of real practical tools which you can use and download from there and start on the journey. My key advice if you're a club is to look at those principles, do a bit of a self-assessment about where you are now, and then make a plan, an action plan about where you're going to move to. And so that kind of answers the second part to your question, Megan, is that by having an action plan doesn't have to be a year. It might be a 2 or 3 year plan of how we're going to continue to make sure that children and young people's safety is a priority at this club. And in that plan, you can detail what you're going to do. But what I would do as a club is make sure that in my newsletters to my families and my club members, I'm talking around, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going next, this is the journey that we're on. And invite parents and carers in and invite children and young people in to have those conversations and to listen to the journey on which you're on, but also ask for their feedback about what's not working and what can you do better. Because in this space, we know, as we go back to the original slide around children need to feel safe and secure to reach their full potential, we really need to listen to them and understand what's making them feel safe and secure or not, so that we can make sport really safe and that they can enjoy and achieve and fundamentally stay in your sport and have the best time, because we know sport has the wonderful opportunity and it is an incredible thing within our society, as we've just seen from the Olympics in Australia, smashing it. And hopefully in the Paralympics to see Australia come out again on very high up on the table and winning well.
Thank you, Phil. And thanks to everybody. I think there's some real reinforcement coming through in the chat for what you've just been talking about. Some shout outs for Sport Integrity Australia, who can help direct you to the right places within your sport if you're not sure, or to your national sporting organisations. Unfortunately, we've come to the end. I'm sure people have many other busy things to be getting on with, or maybe just having a cup of tea and a rest. If we didn't get to your question, or questions come up for you after you leave or in the coming days, definitely feel free to email us at the National Office for Child Safety on the email address up there on the screen. I assume, Phil, since you've shared an email there, you're also
Yes,
happy to be contacted, even if you
absolutely.
just want us to help direct you through to some of the other organisations or people that we have talked about tonight. Thank you all again so much for joining us. It's something we need to talk more about as a community and be open and talk with our colleagues and our friends and other people in our families, because that's the only way that we're going to make sure children are safe and they can just enjoy their childhoods, enjoy their sport, and be able to live up to their full potential. Thank you so much, Phil. It has been lovely to have you. And thanks, everybody. I hope you have a really good evening.
Thank you, Megan. Thanks, everybody.